Order. Chris Loder to move the motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Latham. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. And can I thank all honourable and right honourable friends and members for taking part in this debate today. Now, Madam Chairman, I would just like to start to say there is nothing like a bit of competition between North and West Dorset. And first of all, this morning, I would like to welcome very warmly the Town Clerk of Sherborne, Steve Shields, who is in the gallery. He is a finalist in the Star Council Awards later today, and I understand Shaftesbury is also in the awards later today. So the best of luck to Sherborne Town Council. I'm sure my honourable friend the Minister will make his point for Shaftesbury in a moment. Can I, first of all, also take this opportunity to warmly welcome my honourable friend, the member for North Dorset, on becoming a Minister for Local Government Finance. He, I know, is well versed with the many issues facing us, not just in Dorset, but across rural Britain. And I know many, like me, are pleased to see a Dorset MP within the Department for Levelling Up who isn't purely obsessed with the north and urban areas and who can bring meaningful perspective to rural issues, and particularly rural issues from the southwest. 10 million people live in rural England alone. If you work in the rural economy, you can expect to earn on average £2,000 less than in urban areas. The rural fuel poverty gap is double the national average. Rural people pay on average 20% more council tax per head than those in urban areas. My honourable friend and other neighbour, the member for South Dorset, and I both represent the area of the worst social mobility in the country. I have a secondary school in that area which has been partly closed, and another school where a third of the classrooms are in disrepair. We have significant transport issues, and we have social care challenges that match the needs of a community such as West Dorset, where a third are over the age of 65. Madam Chairman, my constituents are fed up with turning on the telly and listening about levelling up announcements in urban areas in the Midlands and the North, and hearing nothing about the rural southwest or rural Britain. They want to know, and they have sent me here today asking to know why rural hardship is not seen in the same way that urban poverty is, and they are expecting to see their representatives make the case to get that changed, which is why I and others are here today. It should therefore be no surprise that rural matters are going up the agenda. Yesterday, the Honourable Member for Somerton brought a debate here to Westminster Hall about rural services. And can I commend also my honourable friend, the member for St Ives, for chairing the APPG, and my right honourable friend, the outgoing Secretary of State for the Environment and Rural Affairs, for all the work that she has done in her time as well. As the member for West Dorset, my home, where I'm the 6th generation of a tenant farming family, I stand in this hall almost 10 months on from when I last tabled a debate to also champion the cause of millions of people who live in rural Britain, who want a fairer system of taxation and service provision. Whereas before, I focused primarily on the revenue support grant, today I'm here to address the funding of rural councils more broadly, and particularly in favour of my own Dorset Council. This is as if not more important today than it was at the last debate in January, and since little has changed to improve the situation for rural councils since that time. Madam Chairman, it is nearly a decade now since the local government funding formula was locked in. This means that it is also a decade since the faulty distribution of revenue support grant and the corresponding increase in council tax to compensate for the unfair, in my opinion, national distribution of government resources. As the years have passed, the situation for rural councils, exposed relentlessly to the frozen funding formulas, has deteriorated, increasing the rural tax burden on millions in England, including my West Dorset constituents. A recent survey carried out by the County Councils Network and the Society of County Treasurers found that their members face overspending on their budgets by an enormous £600 million per annum. That is 20 county councils and 17 county unitary authorities right across the country that will be collectively overspending in 23-24. Without a clear roadmap for improvement, these councils are running out of time to find solutions to prevent insolvency. And this is one of the reasons why I think it is so important that I bring this matter here today. Against this backdrop, it is a surprise that only 1 in 10 of those surveyed running well-managed councils are unsure or lacking confidence that they will be able to balance their budget this year, which I hasten to remind those present, it is a legal requirement for councils to do so. And without urgent action or urgent reform, this number increases to 4 in 10 next year and 6 in 10 by 2025. That is an unprecedented majority of our rural councils, and the County Councils Network concerned whether they will meet their legal requirements within the next 2 years as well. But why is this the case? What is causing the situation to be so difficult, and why is there an excess burden on rural people? Firstly, the formula that dictates the distribution of the revenue support grant from the government to local authorities. And second, the corresponding levels of council tax that councils are forced to levy to cover their increasing social and services cost. And finally, as my honourable friend the Minister alluded to in his contribution to the Levelling Up Committee earlier this month, the unique characteristics and challenges of each local authority make it difficult to implement a national fix for these solutions and often require a bespoke solution, and I fully understand and support him with that. Madam Chairman, I have spoken a great deal already, both in this hall and in the House of Commons, about these first two, and I will only touch on them again briefly for the purposes of members' information. First, on the issue of revenue support grant. The local government funding formula that was locked in 2013-14, and in doing so, I'm afraid, put rural councils in an unfairly low proportion of receiving centralised government resources and grants. Today, urban councils receive 38% more in government-funded spending power per head than rural councils do. This year, my local authority, Dorset Council, received just £700,000 from central government, which accounts for just 0.2% of funding. That was because that I, and indeed, if I recall correctly, my honourable friend the Minister, who was on the back benches at the time, contributed to the local government funding debate to make the case very strongly for Dorset. But if you were to talk to the local council, they would probably say that there were other adjustments made that compensated for that, and so the net benefit was probably very little, if any, at all. The rest, of course, must be sourced elsewhere, or the government will enter an insolvency situation, and often, of course, that is through the council tax mechanism. As a result, councils in areas of the country that are overlooked for this government support, predominantly rural, must institute that increased rate of council tax, irrespective of their individual demands on services and demographics. Rural residents across the country, as I've said, pay out on average 20% more council tax, and across the County Councils network, 68% of all that funding was received from council tax alone, compared to an average of 56.8%, and that, of course, is lower in most urban boroughs. In everyday terms, this means that your typical Band D council tax bill for someone living in Dorchester, in Sherborne, in Bridport or Lyme Regis or any one of the 132 parishes in West Dorset will be over £2,000 per year. Whilst focusing on our situation in West Dorset, I shall explain why the existing system of rural council funding cannot continue unamended. In West Dorset, Madam Chairman, a third of residents are over the age of 65. It is a vast geographical territory covering over 400 square miles of the most beautiful and picturesque part of the country, it has to be said. But while this may sound idyllic, it is equally tremendously difficult to travel without access to a car or the ability to drive, especially as local public transport options have become more and more restricted. 16 to 19-year-olds, those who are at sixth form in Dorset, have to pay to get the bus to go to sixth form. Why is it when the government pumps billions into TfL and Londoners get it free? That cannot be right. These three factors, revenue support grant, council tax and local characteristics, regularly combine to disadvantage rural communities and people, imposing barriers where there needn't be any, and this can be felt, I think, across society. Now, taken together, it's fair to say that rural councils continue to be placed under unique pressure. This has a knock-on effect for households, but also for businesses. We have seen this clearly during the cost of living crisis, where 3 in 4 councils, many of them serving rural residents, have increased their council tax by the maximum permitted rate. Accounting for this increase, a typical Band D council tax bill for rural residents is 27.5% higher than those faced by London residents. It's also fair to say that the high rise in energy prices has disproportionately affected rural households and businesses. This is against a backdrop where the rural fuel poverty gap is already double the national average. In West Dorset, more than half of households are off-grid, meaning they had limited access to energy support than if you're on the mains gas network. And this is one of the primary reasons why when Dorset Council, established its household support fund for applications, its funding allocation was gone within a matter of hours. The topic of business rates is also a very topical issue for rural councils. The simple nature of our local economy in West Dorset means that 97% of businesses are small or micro-sized. They are not conglomerates. They are not transnational. They are often run by people, maybe from home or with a small premise at the local trading estate, employing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people attempting to make a modest living. But really it means that income derived from retained business rates by the council in West Dorset is 14.5%, whereas Tower Hamlets, for example, to compare in London, receives over 50% from its retained business rates. And to put that in financial proportions, that's 50.2 million for Dorset, 176 million for the borough of Tower Hamlets. We also ought not to forget, of course, the importance of social care. And whilst I recognise this is often an area debated within the Department of Health, the reality is that local government has an important responsibility when it comes to delivering social care services. Residents across the country would be forgiven, I think, for overlooking the acronym ASC on their council tax bill. But in reality, rural councils are forced to derive huge amounts of their income from the adult social care precept. And of course, in total, you would be expecting 3/4 of the amount you pay in council tax to go for social care support. This is because of the simple fact that older people tend to reside in more rural areas. And as I mentioned earlier, a third of our population in West Dorset is over 65, compared to just 10% in some London boroughs. But the matter of an ageing population is one of concern for all rural councils, in my opinion, as rural residents get 13% per head in social care overall support overall. They get 13% less, I should say, per head in social care support overall. And that is one of the main drivers for the council tax increase. The matter of social care becomes sharper when you make the comparison, of course, between urban and rural. Residents in an average Band D property in West Dorset will pay an annual social care precept of £204, 4 pence. But for the same property in, say, the Borough of Westminster, the precept is a mere £3.20. The difference is absolutely enormous. The dividends of this are visible also, especially in funding for young people's services and schools. Across Dorset, there is a core school funding per pupil of £5,728, which places the council in the upper third of upper-tier local authorities for education spending. Other rural authorities fare just as poorly, though, or even worse. Leicestershire, Cheshire, Bedfordshire, all ranked in the top 10 upper-tier local authorities for core school funding per pupil. Looking again to the capital for our rural-urban comparison, it is possible to see that London boroughs occupy all 10 of the top 10 spots for core school funding. Islington, Westminster, Camden, Southwark and Hackney, they all spend over £7,500 per pupil when it comes to education funding. And Tower Hamlets, top of the list, spends £8,122. That is 40% more than the spend on a child in education in rural Dorset. That disparity is simply unfair, and it is not acceptable for those who are being educated in rural Britain. I should be delighted to give way.
My honourable friend's making an excellent speech. I'm really grateful for bringing us together on this really important topic. On top of the disparity within funding, does he also recognise that on top of this ludicrously exaggerated funding that London councils get, they make millions more each on parking fines that they again then are able to put into their communities, and yet this isn't taken into consideration, so actually their budgets are even more inflated beyond that which we are seeing in the basic figures?
Can I thank my honourable friend for her intervention? I wholly agree with her on the points she makes, but it gets worse. And I would like one of my asks to the Minister today to take away, to investigate, is that it's important that we all note that London is getting £236 million a year more in government grant than the formula says it should. £166 million alone goes to 5 London boroughs. Now, I very much appreciate that my honourable friend and neighbour is very new in post, and I'm not expecting him to answer some of these very tricky questions. But I would appreciate it if he would ask his officials to look into that and to understand some of these matters, because for those of us representing rural constituencies, it is simply unacceptable. So can I thank my honourable friend again for her kind intervention. It isn't just education, businesses and social care that this unfairness does pervade, however. It is transport too. The stark reality is that urban councils are in the privileged position of spending on average, 3.5 times more on public transport than rural councils. And this is something we see clearly demarked also between London and West Dorset, and I think I've given enough comparators to make the point. But the fact it's 3.5 times more on public transport in urban areas than rural councils, if anything, it should be the other way round because of the rural disparity. And there is something that is not right in the formulas and understanding for that as well. We do not have a dedicated or overfunded public body in Dorset to oversee our transport network, as in other areas, unlike some, maybe Transport for London, Transport for Greater Manchester and so on. In West Dorset, further education students do not receive free or subsidised travel pass to get to their places of study, but of course in urban areas they often do. Residents are not in the luxury position of receiving eye-watering grants for public transport in rural Britain, and definitely not in West Dorset. But instead, they have to rely on the goodwill of community operators to keep running. And that is not sustainable. And I hope that ministers in the Transport Department will also be able to consider that as well. Madam Chairman, it is evident that the disparity in national funding mechanisms for council funding between rural and urban areas is actually far-reaching, cross-cutting, and very difficult for those councils on the wrong side of the formulas. Almost 10 million people live in rural England. And so I would like to draw my remarks to a close by stating very clearly and asking the Minister that we here, most of us, I think, all of us here, represent rural constituencies. And for many of us, rural residents ourselves, we want to see action to improve the challenges and the financial difficulties that our local councils face. It's very important that we see the continuation of excellent government work across the board to really come forward and improve the fairness of this truly very crucial aspect, I think, in government policy that he, like I and others, have attempted to do for some while now. Primarily, I think we need to see fundamental reform for the frozen funding formulas that, in my view, constitute a levy, which penalise rural residents simply for where they live. And it serves to strike, I'm afraid, at the heart of fairness, which is not on. This country has moved on a long way in the decades since 2013-14. It is fair to say that the funding formulas and the revenue support grant formula that I've mentioned were very much geared to a very different climate in 2013 and 14. But we know that many things have changed, many things have improved, and some things have gotten worse. And therefore that formula, as indeed as other models, things like the Green Book and so on, should also be amended to make sure that that fairness is realised. If we continue as we are with rural councils not receiving the fairness that they deserve, county authorities will have no choice but to cut back on some of the services that they have to provide. And I think it's only fair but very important that I let the government know that that for me is not acceptable to the extent we are potentially facing in the future. And I very much, I'm very pleased that my honourable friend and neighbour is the Minister for Local Government Finance. He brings a level of understanding and insight from Dorset that I don't think we've seen in that chair before. 10 months ago, I was having this very same debate with his predecessor, or predecessor but one, who was dealing with a situation, in his constituency where the council tax was £800 less than it is in his and mine. And unless you, as an MP, really understand that and feel that day to day from our constituents, as we both do, it is difficult to really understand that. And I wish him well with making good progress in this area. Rural England, I think, is crying out for his help. I look forward to him being the messiah of local government finance. The February debate on local government finance is always an interesting one, and I very much look forward to it, and hope we'll have a further conversation, but with much more progress in the meantime. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Because there's so many people wish to speak, I'm going to have to impose a 5-minute limit from now. So, Jamie Stone.
Thank you.